Good morning. My name is Ronald Bartels. I'm from Fusion Broadband, South Africa. And what we're going to discuss is something that's come up a lot lately, and that's around security incidences that have happened at organizations and large organizations. So at Fusion Broadband South Africa, we have an SD-WAN product, and it is a product that is secure by default. So we do a lot of security and provide protection and things like encryption. So by default, since the year 2000, the majority of corporates have actually got links known as MPLS links that have been set up between their branches and their sites, and those are not necessarily encrypted. So we have a perimeter, and within that perimeter, it's pretty much a person can get anywhere. So typically what happens in most of these breaches, once a person gets through the perimeter and they're inside of their network, they do something called lateral movement, and which allows them to actually compromise any system that is within an organization. And that's what we've seen lately in a lot of these cases where breaches have happened. So how do we move on from here? I'm going to talk about what a person basically needs to do. And I'll give you an analogy, and I'm going to talk about the Apollo space program. Now, imagine for one moment in time that when they launched the Apollo space program, they did not have a mission control. You can see right now, I'm actually sitting in the original Apollo mission control. This mission control has actually just recently been restored, and you can actually go and view it in its original location in Houston, precisely how it was the day that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. It is quite a spectacular place to go and visit. But let's assume that mission control did not happen and that it did not exist, and NASA decided to send people to the moon without one. Well, what would you have is you'd have these three guys up in the sky trying to make decisions about what to do, and invariably their decisions would have been wrong. They wouldn't be able to operate fast enough to do some of the things they do. Neil Armstrong famously landed the Apollo spacecraft with alarms going off. He was asking mission control how to deal with those alarms, and they assisted. But the best and most famous use of the Apollo mission control was in the Houston we have a problem scenario. And that was in Apollo 13, when there was an explosion on the spacecraft, and there was a number of events that were required to do that mission control actually did to save that spacecraft. And without mission control, the three astronauts would never have came back to Earth. So let's go right into the actual details of this webinar. I'm going to talk about implementing a modern fusion center using the methods from the Apollo program. What are fusion centers? Well, fusion centers are created to deal with cybersecurity incidences. They were originally used by the military and government, but have been adopted largely by banks. A very good example of fusion center is the one that MasterCard has created. A fusion center is a structured organization that mitigates cybersecurity incidences, and it follows an optimal process. Effectively, when you have a fusion center and a security incident occurs, you're not doing things on the fly. You actually know how you're going to deal with it, and you're doing it in a very structured manner. So, for example, when you often hear people say, due to an abundance of caution, we are going to do this. What they are really saying with that statement is that we have absolutely no idea what the risk is, and we are shitting ourselves. And then when you're in that particular scenario, it really doesn't help that you communicate something like that that is so transparent that you don't know what you're doing. If you're a big organization and you're using language like that, then you're in the hiding, and it actually just shows you that you haven't got any structure or risk management thought behind what you're doing. The second thing that people always also do is they say, we are going to switch off all our computers, or we're going to switch off all our systems. Well, what that shows is that people do not know what their inventory is. They do not know what computer systems they have. They do not know which computer systems are at risk. The next thing is they say, we do not trust our IT people or our security people to actually be able to deal with this. So we are actually going to switch it off, and we're going to call in somebody externally who knows a bit better than what they do about how to fix the problem. So in all of these cases, in most of these cases, you can actually see from the press releases that these organizations have no fusion center. I can guarantee you that Colonial Pipeline did not have a fusion center. Otherwise, they would not have shut down their systems. So fusion systems are much like target teams, and I'll get into what target teams are. But target teams are effectively groups of experts assigned to investigate or solve technical or systematic problems. So let's go into the target teams, because it actually forms a big basis of it. And the target teams is a very good place to start and to understand about how to build a fusion systems if you know the history of target teams. Well, target teams were first used in the early years of spaceflight. The first big success of a target team was actually in the Apollo program, and it was around navigational problems. Well, without getting into too much detail, to navigate to the moon, the people discovered that the first flights, the navigation didn't work precisely as how they predicted. Then a JPL target team discovered something called mascons. And mascons were lunar mass concentrations that they didn't know about before. And this helped them assist in solving the navigation problems that they were having. And by the time the Apollo program had people walking on the moon, they had perfect navigation because they'd actually figured out these anomalies. So after that, target teams were used multiple times, and the most famous time was during Apollo 13, where the mission control director said failure is not an option. And during this flight, one of the things that they had to do is they shut down some systems to save battery life. And when they started it up, they had to start it up with the minimum amount of current being used. It was a target team on Earth that rewrote the book on the startup procedure and how to start it up using the minimum amount of battery. Then there was the CO2 problem, where the astronauts, the scrubbing system in the lunar module was insufficient in trying to deal with the CO2 being scrubbed. So what they had to do was they had to re-engineer the scrubbers so that it could scrub out the CO2. And then the final example I'm going to be using where a target team came into play was how they actually adjusted the trajectory so that they could hit Earth again. And they did that using a target team, and they did it with a lot of systems being unavailable, and only with the systems that could be utilized and available for the astronauts to be able to do that trajectory correction. Apollo 13 landed on Earth safely. It also is the spacecraft that has landed at Earth and come to Earth at the fastest possible speed. So Apollo 13 was a very, very famous example of target teams and how target teams solved the problem. So if we go back to other examples of target teams being used, that NTSB, which is responsible for investigating aircrafts and their failures or accidents, they have a very famous target team called the GO team. The GO team actually is the one that's first on site, and it makes certain that it has got enough evidence taken from the site to be able to draw a conclusion later, because it's very important to get the evidence as soon as possible before people come on site and disturb it, because even a little bit of disturbance will make it impossible to determine what happened to that flight. So we get back to Fusion Center, and how do you build a Fusion Center looking at target teams and how target teams were built in the Apollo program. So this is proposed by myself and how I see it, and it's something called the hexagon model. It's called the hexagon model because instead of a single target team, I basically propose 6 target teams, and each of those 6 teams have a different skill set and do something different related to the security incident. And I'll go and step through each of these components. So what is this that's been proposed by myself? Well, as I said, they're the 6 distinct teams, and these teams are either ad hoc or permanent. So if you're a very small organization, you probably will utilize other people and bring them into the Fusion Center as required. If you're a big organization, you'll have them permanently there. The other thing is that of these things, they're actually disciplines. So you might have an individual who's capable of belonging to multiple teams, or the ability to do skills that can be utilized in the different areas of the hexagon. The purpose of the hexagon is to encourage operational efficiencies. And what we mean by that is that if you have got a security incident, you don't want your pipeline to be down for an extended time period like 1 week. You want it to be as short as possible time frame as possible. A couple of minutes, hour at the most, not more than that. You want to actually have things squared off so that you can get to operations very fast again and return systems to normal. So the other thing about the hexagon model is that there are structured tasks, so that there's no single individual who is flooded. Often what I've seen when outages occur is that there's an engineer who's at the coalface trying to solve the problem, and that there's a manager behind him who keeps on asking him for feedback. And so the guy then stops what he's doing and then spends the next couple of minutes providing feedback to the manager and stops doing what he was doing in the engineering work. And then he comes back to doing that task, and now he has to relearn and remember everything that he's done up to that point, because he's been interrupted and he might have now overlooked something. So, you know, he might have only been speaking to the manager for 10 minutes, but it might take him 20 minutes to get back to where he was before. So one of the things about this hexagon model, that what it allows you to do, it actually structures the task so that no single individual is flooded like that. All individuals operate within their skill set at their operational efficiencies. So we start off with the major incident manager. And this is similar to the flight director of Apollo. And in that case, it was Gene Kranz, who was the mission control director. Major incidences are there in a time of crisis. And when you have this crisis, there is no real time to follow ad hoc protocol or bureaucratic red tape and how you do things. Okay, the mission control guy needs to sit there and says, this is how we're going to do it, and we're going to make a decision to do it like that. They can't say, no, we need to speak to this guy, that guy, we need to do it in this particular manner. There's also bureaucratic red tape and what you can and cannot do. So when you have these types of things, a person needs a structure to say, we've got the crisis, let the team take the crisis and make the decisions to correct the crisis, and that they have the authority to do that. And that the team leader for this is the major incident manager. The other thing the major incident manager needs to do is he needs to make certain that the right individual skill set is there for the right role in the structure. So he needs to actually look at the people and what their skill sets are and implement them in the right role. Not just because they're available to fill a role, but that the right person is there to fill the right role so that the operational efficiencies can occur. So the first target team that I'm going to talk about is the ECHO team. Okay, the ECHO team is responsible for stakeholder communication and it's the one that owns the major incident from cradle to grave. They establish the communications between the operations, the customers, the IT executive, and the stakeholders. They are the ones that actually communicate to everybody. It isn't the responsibility of the individuals who are working in the in solving the security incident to do the communication. This team will do it on their behalf. So this team needs to know that there's pressure associated with various expectations around service levels, and what the clients expect might not match the service level. And when there's an account outage that has occurred, then people are a bit at edge. So this team needs to be aware to be able to handle that pressure and deal with that pressure. They need to take the pressure and let the people solving the incident not deal with that pressure of communicating with people who might be upset and not really in a friendly disposition to anything that's happened at that moment in time. So what this team effectively does do, it takes that bottleneck out of the equation where somebody interferes in a task to get feedback and communication, when it would be best served that doesn't happen in that particular manner. The next, I'm going to talk about the Delta team. Now, from a previous webinar that I did, that I explained how outages work, and I gave the analogy of a puncture on a bicycle, which you can view, and I'll put the link down in the description below. The diagnosis is a very important element, because once you've detected something, you've got to identify the components that are impacted, and crucially, how are you going to repair those components? So there's a certain team that deals with it, and eventually they identify things matched in something which in IT terms people call a configuration management database, which is a crucial component. So if you've got all of your components in a configuration management database, and you know what their attributes are, it immediately allows you to diagnose things in a manner that is quicker and faster. You don't have to go and discover things. You can go and look things up. It will then tell you, this is the component, this is how it works, this is the documentation associated with it. So you immediately know, oh, okay, this is what I need to do to either fix, repair, replace, or upgrade. It makes the process a lot faster. So the team investigates the possible causes, and what it does is it goes through what is known as the immediate and visual causes, and then goes to the identified proximate causes, and then they actually then go through a process to say, what is the root causation? And they then are able to say, okay, this is how we're going to fix it, repair it, or alternatively, how we do it. In an information incident security team, people often have a lot of names for different things, and this Delta team is obviously also got a name in that area, and it's often referred to as the Red team. Finally, the Romeo team. So the Romeo team is the team that actually executes the repair. They are the actual field agents. They are the ones that have been told, this is the component you need, this is what you need to replace it, this is how you need to restore it, and this is how it needs to be taken into normal business operations again. And that is what this particular team does. They receive all of their input from the Delta team on how to do this. The team often here has to deal with aspects of logistics of the component being repaired, and is it available, is it not available? You know, I mean, if it comes down to having a Heath Robertson contraption created to solve a problem, as they did in the Apollo 13 scenario, this team might do it. But effectively, you don't want to be in that situation where you want to do that. You need to have all of this upfront in your logistics available, so that you can have components available immediately on site and within reach, that you don't have to wait and order things. Right now, we've got a big problem in IT that things are going to take ages and ages to actually arrive on shipping. Finally, the next, getting on to the next team, which is the Whiskey team. the Whiskey team has got a very specific task, and that they actually responsible for workarounds. So workarounds means that, unlike the Delta team, who don't actually concentrate on diagnosing and getting a resolution or fix, this team just says, what workaround can we do in a temporary manner to make services come back to normal? Okay, so you might have something that needs to be repaired and fixed, but these guys might have a workaround to say, let's do this workaround in the meantime to actually get things up and running. For an example, you might have a scenario where people are boarding an aircraft using an electronic system. If the electronic system is available, it might be potentially possible to utilize a manual workaround. So if this team has developed and knows those manual workarounds, they can assist people in implementing it and saying, is the electronic system is down, but here is a paper-based process that you can follow, and you don't have to figure out that paper-based process. We have it here ready for you, and this is how you do it. So most importantly, this team actually utilizes known methods and or the potential to create workarounds if those known methods aren't available. So we have this team, which is an extremely important part, because you don't want to sit around with customers that are complaining, waiting for IT people to fix it, when there is obviously something that's available to help the guys in a temporary or short-term manner that will get them past the hurdle and the immediate hurdle. Finally, we have the Bravo team. The Bravo team is responsible for business continuity and serve the purpose of business resumption when there has been a absolute total outage or failure or crisis event. So unlike a workaround, a workaround is temporary. This team says, heck, we've got a problem and it is a major problem, and we need to resort to a total and permanent workaround to solve the outage. So these guys sit there and they go, well, we've got a data center. Obviously, what do we do if that data center fails? We build another one. Then they go to the process of what do we do to move from one data center to the other. And often the Bravo team, once they've done all of this work, they can communicate with that Whiskey team who's doing the workaround and says, we've built all of these things. You can actually use some components of them in a temporary manner as a workaround. So the two teams can collaborate and talk to each other, but they serve different purposes. The Bravo one is we are working on the assumption that we have to cater for a full workaround, and the other one says we're going to do a temporary workaround. We get to the Alpha team. Now, the Alpha team has got the easiest job of the lot, but probably the most difficult job intellectually of the lot. They're not responsible in the crisis at that moment in time. They go afterwards and they analyze it and they report on the crisis. So the immediate way that you get confidence as an organization once you've had a crisis or an event like this is you don't say, done and dusted, we fixed it, we're back again, we're great, we're awesome, we're the best. We know people like that who say that, but they're not necessarily the best. The only way you can get that trust is if you go back to your customers and say, this is what happened, this is how we fixed it, this is what we're going to implement to prevent it from happening again. So what you need to do in that moment in time, you're not going to know it immediately once you've restored services, that analysis. You go back, you take a couple of weeks, might take a couple of months, depending upon how big the outage was, and you come back and you actually give that information and you say, and you're transparent about it, because that is where you get the confidence about it. If you have a security event and then, for example, a bank gets hacked because their ATMs are hacked, and then they come back to you and say it was a glitch and we fixed it, there's absolutely no confidence in that. You'll go, well, why did it happen? Why was the glitch there? Why were you not prepared for it? What are you going to do to prevent it in the future? None of those questions get answered. So you go, maybe I shouldn't use that bank because they don't know what they're doing, that they're a risk. So finally, in review, so a crisis cannot be managed using the existing operational structures. For example, all of these things that are happened, you cannot let the guys that have got the boots on the ground and that are running things suddenly expected to be pulled apart from running the operations and say, heck, now fix this major crisis. You've got to have those operational resources that might have the skills. You need to move them into a fusion center. And in the fusion center, there needs to be those structured teams that can help them and deal with the crisis, even if it's a temporary in nature. Multiple coordinated teams are proposed here to manage the crisis effectively. There isn't one team that does the crisis. There are 6 teams, and they work together in an effective manner to solve the problem. If you had things done in a single team manager with a single manager, you would probably not have great efficiencies because there'd be lots of conflict. If you have a structure where people are operating in their skill sets, things are more efficient and more and operate better. I go back to the mission control. At mission control, they had different areas doing different components of the flight. There was a doctor, there was a communications specialist, there was an electronics specialist, there was a navigation specialist, and they operated in their own teams. And then they all came to report into the director of flight operations. And the director of flight operations was the guy who made the calls and made the difficult calls and is able to take input from the teams and decide best what to do. So finally, an integrated approach is required for crisis management. It isn't something that you go, oh, this should never have happened to us. And then we go through this absolute crisis where we have to get the government involved with special legislation to assist us. We need to up front have thought about what happens in this scenario and how we deal with it. Once we're in that scenario, you can see it will happen totally different. It will be a totally different mechanism and process and result. I have no doubt that if a fusion team was in place and existed during the Colonial Pipeline event, you would have had a far different result. You would have had operations restored far quicker.